I hereby call the meeting Vacant Property Committee to order. Ms. Collins, would you please commence with a roll call?
Yes, this meeting is being held as an electronic meeting pursuant to and in compliance with Richmond City Council Ordinance Number 2020-093, adopted April 9th, 2020, and extended by Ordinance Number 2020-183, adopted August 20th, 2020, and by Ordinance Number 2020-232, adopted December the 14th, 2020, and the school board's resolution approved on April 20th, 2020. The meeting notice also stated that the meeting would be a virtual meeting and would be live streamed for the public on the school division's Facebook page, and the link was provided. The agenda of the meeting was posted to board docs. Mr. Young,
Present.
Ms. Rizzi,
Here.
Ms. Burke, and Ms. Page. Mr. Steve Pancham. Okay.
I think I saw Steve just. I think I saw
sorry.
Steve just. Perhaps you could recite his name again.
Steve Pancham.
Hello.
Okay, you're here. Great. Deborah Corliss and Lawrence Williams
Here.
and Richard Rumrill.
Here.
All right, very, very good. And a couple of points of order. One, we are also joined by our friend and we're going to call him de facto committee member, Jason Giot. We just haven't formally, as a school board, appointed him, but for all intents and purposes, Jason joins us this evening, and so thank you, Jason. Second, I think I saw Paul McClellan on the call. Like Jason, we have not formally amended the legislation that provides for these two gentlemen to officially join us, but for all intents and purposes, they are, as far as I'm concerned, members of the committee. Thank you, Paul McClellan, for being with us. And then I see Nicole Thompson is here in her capacity as legal counsel. I do want to share with the group that a couple of our members will be joining a little bit late. Specifically, Cheryl Burke will be joining us shortly, and then regrettably, Ms. Corliss, Deborah Corliss, shared with me that she's feeling a little under the weather and is unable to participate. And Ms. Page had a unexpected obligation at the 11th hour. But let's see. I think what I'd like to do next, if you would indulge me real briefly, last meeting, I don't think we yet had an opportunity to introduce you to my colleague, my new colleague, Miss Stephanie Rizzi. But I shared with each of you via email that she would be our new member of the Vacant Property Committee. Ms. Rizzi, would you take just a few seconds to share with the group who you are, and perhaps 30 seconds as it relates to your perspective pertinent to the committee?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Miller-Rizzi, newly elected 5th District School Board Rep. I am excited to serve on this committee. I have had some talks with my city council person, and I've also, been a member of my community for more than 20 years. I'm interested in also with, issues related to asset management, and I want to make sure that RPS is doing the best it can with what we have. And so I'm happy to be here. I've got some things to learn, I'm sure, but I am here to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next, Madam Clerk, we need to approve the minutes, and we actually have a couple of meetings worth of minutes, but wanted to inquire if everyone, or if nearly everyone, had an opportunity to review said minutes. They are posted electronically to RPS board docs. I certainly can appreciate that our citizen members perhaps are less familiar with that link and the data that's enclosed therein than my school board colleagues. But do we have a motion relevant to approval of the minutes? And again, we have two meetings worth of minutes, correct, Madam Clerk? Is that right?
Yes,
That is
the
approved.
8th, December the 8th, and the January 20th minutes are up. Mr. President,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
you skipped over 1.02.
I'm sorry, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda, and/or is there any request to amend the agenda? Specifically this evening, we are going to address the real school property located on Chamberlain Avenue at 4979. Any motion as it relates to the agenda? I have a
I make a motion that the agenda be approved.
very good. Thank you, sir.
I'll second.
And I think I heard Steve second. Any discussion? If not, Madam Clerk, don't know that that it's requisite for a roll call for a committee meeting, but still, just for the purpose of crossing all of our T's and dotting our I's, if you will.
Okay, Mr. Young,
Aye.
Ms. Ritzie,
Yes.
Steve Pancham,
Present.
Lawrence Williams,
Yes.
and Mr. Richard Remble.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And then next, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the two preceding meetings? I'm going to interpret the silence as probably folks haven't had an opportunity to
That's
review.
pretty much it. I haven't had a chance to read it, so I couldn't, if I couldn't approve it.
Fair point. Madam Clerk, may I ask, we can come back to this before we adjourn the meeting, but if it's not too much trouble, I apologize for this request of you, but while we're in this meeting, is there any chance that you could send everybody on this call or on it, just send the entire committee a link to the RPS board doc, so perhaps they can multitask in the next few minutes and just review those minutes. So by the time we adjourn, perfectly, we can approve it. Do that. To send a link to the to access the minutes on the RPS board docs.
Okay, doing it now.
Thank you, ma'am. And for everyone on the call, please anticipate via email the same email that you received correspondence from me. A note shortly from Kim to include the minutes. All right, then we will proceed with the meat of the order. Why we're here tonight to discuss another property. To date, we have discussed. Anybody correct me if I miss one, but we've discussed Moore Street. We've discussed 13 acres. We have discussed Ruffin Road. This evening, we will discuss a property on Chamberlain Avenue. And I see Bobby Hathaway is here. And you all know Bobby, but before I invite him, request that he provide a little information relevant to the property. This facility is currently occupied. We do have a lease with an organization that has been in the building for approximately the last 3 years. It's a group that is in the business of alternative education. Terms of the lease are because it's a public document. I can share with you, correct, Nicole, the amount of money that is expected in payment, correct, each month?
Yes, it is a public document, so.
Very good. So Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, I just said it
yeah.
can be shared. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Is $500 a month. The property is assessed, if my numbers are correct, that the actual property is about $900,000. The building itself is worth another approximately $400,000, and this is again referred to as the real school at 4929. I think I referenced 4979. I apologize. 4929 Chamberlain Avenue, constructed in 1925. Mr. Hathaway, would you perhaps share a little bit about our director of facilities? Would you share a little bit about this property?
Bobby, you're still muted.
Okay, is that better?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So you covered quite a bit of it, Jonathan. You corrected it. It is at 4929 Chamberlain Avenue. We acquired the building in 1942 from Henrico County during the annexation. It's a one-story brick building built in 1925, about 8,900 square feet. The land that it sits on is just under 1 acre of land. The conditions of the building, we currently have asbestos floor tile inside the building. The roof and the heating system are over 25 years old, so past their life expectancy. So there's a lot of repairs in the future with the property.
Jonathan, I hope you don't mind me doing
Please.
this.
No, I was going to commend you for that. That's helpful. Thank you, Jason. Please.
I just logged into CoStar. This is a subscription service that I pay for, but while you were talking, I just wanted to pull this up. It's got some pictures of the property and just some stats.
This is super helpful, particularly for folks that may be less than familiar with the property. This is Bobby. Correct me. This is right at Azalea Avenue. Is that right?
Yeah.
So for persons perhaps that have like yours truly been here for a while, my entire life, you'll recall this is not terribly far from the old Azalea Mall. I'm not speaking out of order, am I, Bobby? That's just down the street. Yeah, from the old Azalea Mall. Yeah. And there's a lot of property there that is largely underutilized, and it hasn't yet been developed. Jason, has your firm have you had any experience? Are you familiar with anything either because your firm is working on it or just because it's been published in BizSense or anywhere else that may be materializing there in the neighborhood right there in the Azalea proximity to this building?
To be honest, I can't claim to be very knowledgeable about this specific intersection. So other than having to log into CoStar and pulling it up, that's about the extent of my contribution at the moment. So,
well, no, that's trust me, it's very, very helpful. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment. I'd like to make a comment about the site too. It is at the intersection of Chamberlain, but also it's near Pine Camp, almost adjacent to it as far as contiguous property. And so
that's right.
Where the Pine Camp needs what I call a storefront presence, it may be relevant to the Pine Camp complex there on the right. But that's city property as well, and it seems to be well managed from a public recreation point of view, public service point of view. Schools may be interested in Pine Camp in terms of the area. Of course, John Marshall is down the road as well as Henderson within 2 blocks.
Right.
So it's strategically placed. The 7-Eleven across the street there was just built a few months ago. And the irony is the little auto shop to the left there, as an architect, I did that about 6 months ago. But still, yeah, it's a prime intersection from a retail point of view.
Right. Yeah. Some excellent points. And for folks that may not be super familiar with the area, Lawrence, thank you. You referenced John Marshall and Henderson. So we've instituted a new STEM academy at Henderson Middle. Part of the impetus for that, part of it, pertain to under enrollment at both of those schools. Two proud schools with a lot of tradition, but both schools have been terribly under enrolled for a long period of time. Both John Marshall and Henderson. In fact, at one point, we were referencing something like 1,000 vacant seats at Henderson. Only share that in the context of we are talking about a former school building at 4929 and demand for that kind of space. Bobby, do you have any? You referenced that we need a new roof, likely need to do a lot of remediation pertinent to asbestos, HVAC. Do you have I hate to even ask this, but a ballpark figure, even if it's kind of a very rough estimate of what it would take for whether it was RPS or anybody else to repair that building and to bring it to the standard?
Oh, I mean, to bring it to standard, that'd be a stretch right there, Jonathan. I can just tell you the roof alone is probably somewhere around 80 to 100,000 for the roof, and then you're probably looking at about for the boiler system that's there, about $60,000 to replace that, and then the asbestos mitigation is, based on the square footage, and that's going to be up there too. But there's other things that have to be considered there. The windows that are in the building, they're in bad shape too, and we've learned that a lot of the windows in these older buildings contain asbestos in the sealant and the caulking around the windows, so that drives up the abatement costs as well.
Can I jump in? So I just renovated the West Hampton School building, which was built in 1917, just 8 years prior to this one. Everything you just said was true. The windows, the glazing around the windows all had asbestos. There was lead paint. It wasn't even worth keeping the windows. So we had to replace them all. It was cheaper than trying to refurbish the windows.
Right.
And so by the time you do that, you're ordering custom windows, which are a fortune. We spent $250,000. Now that's a 25,000 square foot building, so it's bigger, but just on new windows.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of asbestos in not just things that you would normally think about, pipe wrap and stuff like that, roof caulking, it's in the plaster. And so we had to test all the plaster, and we had hot spots throughout the building that we had the guys in hazmat suits going in there. So I've got to believe with these two buildings built within 8 years of each other, and they kind of look similar too, if you look at them.
Can we back up a second? And I'd like to ask a couple of questions. My pastor was on the school board when they decided to lease this building to someone who's doing adult vocational education program, and it's kind of difficult work. He's working partly with ex-offenders and trying to help them become contractors. And I thought the idea was that they were going to do maybe some maintenance on the building, and I don't know if they're doing if they've been successful. I know it's not being rented for a lot. I understand that there's a liability issue. I don't understand the asbestos thing. If you grind it up and suck it in, it's really bad. But if it's there, if it's not friable, if it's not ground up, it isn't a really big issue. So I'm a little bit confused about what came up. If this is being used for an educational purpose and that's stabilizing the building, which is very difficult to do, that's something. And it's not sitting there. I don't know if the city's paying a lot for utilities. It's not a very cheap rent, but it's very difficult kind of educational work that they're doing. So, did it come up simply because the lease is over? Have they been successful at all? Are they doing any education? What is the, is that what we're discussing, whether it gets leased again or whether it gets?
Yeah, let me, thank you for that, Richard. And Jason, I want you to please continue where you left off, but let me, if I may, just first address Richard's question. So the organization, and thank you for the additional context, super helpful, Richard. The lease, three-year lease. Nicole, correct me if I speak in error, but the 3-year lease actually just renewed automatically. So in other words, there was a clause in the lease that provided for an automatic renewal absent either or both of the parties deciding something to the contrary. So the organization is, as of February the 25th, 2021, in the building. In regards to if any improvements to the building have been made, I don't know. I asked that same question, and I don't know the answer to that. In full disclosure, I will share with you that there is at least one other organization that has conveyed an interest. It has conveyed an interest to me, at least, in using that building, and specifically, I don't want to embellish, but they have, not unlike what you shared, Richard, communicated some interest in kind work, in kind contributions, and offsetting, if they were to have a lease in that property, offsetting monetary payments with instead investment in making some of the kind of improvements that we've just discussed. Does that help? Does that answer your question? Or
okay, but has there been any review of the performance of the current tenant? I mean, if they're doing a good job and the roof is not really relevant, if they're patching it and they're keeping it going for like the next 10 years without causing damage, then it may be overdue to be replaced, but it's okay. And I don't know, I mean, maybe it makes sense to get a more effective organization. That's fine if that's the case.
No, all very valid questions. I will share with you. Well, Stephanie's waiting to jump in here. Ms. Rizzi, please.
I don't know if Ms. Hudasco had a point of clarity before I ask another question. Did you?
I was going to make a point, but I'm happy to go after you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say in my cursory review of the lease, I don't believe there's any performance standards. So I'm not sure that would have been within RPS's scope to determine the success of their program as a measure of continuation of the lease. I think it was our determination around the lease would probably come through this body, given just our interest in surplus properties.
Mr. Young, if I may, excuse me, Ms. Rizzi, and that was what I was going to say, and also jump in as far as from what I'm seeing on the lease as well, there was just supposed to be, cursory maintenance, for lack of a better term, upkeep based on, whatever they needed to use within the lease. So from, and just to jump off of what Mr. Young said, the lease has, will essentially automatically renew come March.
Thank you,
Mr.
you both, ladies.
Can I ask a question just because I'm new to this committee? So what exactly is your criteria for determining whether to keep a property and keep a lease in place over the long term, or to add it to a disposition list? Is it if there is a tenant and there's a meaningful organization there, even if it's not a good return on investment for the school board, you guys may decide to keep it? Or is it purely an ROI equation where if you can't make sense of keeping it, you dispose of it and you take the asset and you sell it and you realize the money and you use that for some other purpose?
Yeah, excellent questions, and I want to get to Stephanie, but Jason, briefly, I'll share with you. We have not, we haven't really defined that, to be completely honest. I think that that's part of the part of the most important work that we have yet to do, to define just what are the criteria. We've taken a lot of stabs at it. We have identified a lot of different kind of variables, and we've even put together, for folks you may recall, a pie chart and assigned, for lack of better description, weighted criteria, but we haven't actually we haven't yet done the work of saying this building, we haven't filled in the pie chart, for lack of better description. Hope that helps. And there was another point, I'm sorry, but Jason, for me, I'm going to come back to that because I know Stephanie was waiting, but there was something else you said, darn it, and I can't recall. Must be getting old or something, but I'm sorry, Stephanie.
Yeah, so I have a few questions. Some of it I just might need explaining. Do we have, I'm assuming, Ms. Thompson, we have an original copy of the contractor agreement that we have with the current tenant?
Yes, I mean, yes, I'm looking at the, on my computer, I'm looking at the scan copy, yes.
Okay. And, you know, we're saying the property itself is assessed at $900,000. I'm assuming that there's no lien on it. The city owns it. The schools own it. Is that right? And so I wonder, you know, and I'm new to the committee, but is it possible to borrow against the value of it to get these improvements made and then have it be in use for something related to either schools or to our communities? Because I think a part of, you know, deciding whether to, you know, quit a property like this or sell it has more, well, it certainly money, as, is it Mr. Guillot? Guillot, okay. As Mr. Guillot just mentioned, you know, certainly there's an issue with money, but we also care about what these buildings end up being in our communities, I think. And so I just wonder if at any point, do we, as the entity that owns these properties, decide sometimes to use its value to invest in improvements and then have more of a say over what happens?
So I can answer that. So most, if not all, of the school buildings are owned by the city, but RPS has management and control. So what the process is that if the school board decides that the use, that they no longer want to use the building is then surplus back to the city. So that's what has happened. Mr. Guillot said he had worked on West Hampton. That is what had happened with West Hampton. So that building was surplus back to the city. There is actually an ordinance that was passed by the city council. I can't remember how many years ago. I want to say 6 or 8 now, that says that when schools that have been surplus back are sold, and once the board decides to give the city back a quitclaim deed, if it's sold, then the money is supposed to go back to the school once the property is sold. So there is actually an ordinance that says that. So part of, I know what we talked about, and I will defer to Mr. Young on this, but I know what we talked about in the last meeting is going through and deciding which properties, you know, if they haven't been surplus and they're empty, if you want to surplus them, or if they have already been surplus, whether you want to recommend to the board having a quitclaim deed done so that it can go back to the city. And then, and I believe that even in the ordinance, and I don't have that in front of me, but even in the ordinance, it does allow RPS to have some say in who it's sold to. You know, they at least take that into consideration.
So we don't have any power to like leverage the value of the property for another lien to do what we want to do with it?
No, because you don't own it. You don't own the property, you manage and control. So that's why the school board can issue a lease. It can rent to, a church under school board policies or some of the other location things that you have, in different buildings right now. But to actually sell the property or do anything with it that would require ownership, no, you don't have that, because they belong to the city.
I guess if I could jump in real quick, I guess one of the questions you're looking at the property, and I believe you got John Marshall and Henderson there and Pine Camp, is kind of what is you would think the strategic goal for the school board in that area to determine whether or not the building is worth salvaging or refurbishing, renovating, and useful, to use it. Is there a strategic goal or initiative for that area in particular from the school board?
Well, first I want to acknowledge that this district is a third district, so I'm always reticent to speak for any of my colleagues. Specifically, that's Kenya Gibson's district. But let me just acknowledge my bias. So please, with that disclaimer, take what I'm going to say next with a grain of salt. But and at the risk of belaboring the point I made earlier, Steve, I would contend that we are already under enrolled there in Northside in the Chamberlain corridor. Specifically, we already have more brick and mortar than what we need or anticipate. That's subject to obviously a lot of subjective debate. Everyone will recall, for example, some of the new development, the multi-use development that is going up in near proximity to seminary. There was a lot of debate then about if we would see at RPS an infusion of new students. But all I will cite is now in 2021 that we are under enrolled there in the area. But please, anybody, Stephanie, Michelle, Bobby, anybody jump in if you care to disagree with that. Oh, and I see Cheryl Burke just joined us. Cheryl, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Michelle?
Jonathan, if I could just add one other final thing, I just wanted for clarity on the lease. It had been on this 3 to 4 year lease, a little under 4. The auto renewal, though, to be clear to the group, was a 1 year auto renewal.
Right.
And then, so it's not that it auto renewed and for that full period. So I still think that the discussion is timely about what we would want to do with the property in the short term.
Mr. Young, can I pull up the tax record? Because somebody mentioned it was assessed at 900,000, and when I pulled up the tax record, it was more than that. So I just we can work with facts.
Please, and you all know that I'm you're being way too formal. It's just Jonathan, please.
Okay.
But
I'm
yeah.
okay. Since no one can pronounce my last name anyway, I'm okay with Jason. So if I've got the right address here, it looks like it's worth almost 1.3 according to the assessor. Right,
the land and the property. And Jason, I was gonna call on you next to. I know it's unfair, very unfair, to ask you about a building that you haven't spent any time in or spent any time outside looking at some of the other properties and what may or may not happen. But are you able, just because of your experience, not just at West Hampton, but for folks that don't know, Jason's actually worked on some other properties not unlike this, to give us some idea of, for somebody to come in here, if somebody were to come in and say, hey, we'd like to redevelop this property and retain the building, what, I mean, what kind of, what's the, how do I say it? What kind of dollar figure do you think somebody would be prepared to propose for facility, given all the needs for improvement to the structure?
So obviously that question depends on the use. So are you know, if someone was proposing office use for this, it's going to be different than necessarily educational or multifamily, residential. So that's kind of the first question. What is the end use? But at a very minimum, you know, some of the, as Mr. Hathaway was talking about earlier, all those things that once, you know, you can keep a building hobbling along and make minor repairs to the roof and stuff to a certain degree. But if you're doing a wholesale renovation, you end up opening a can of worms because you run into asbestos, you run into ADA issues. You know, look at these old buildings, you know, ADA wasn't around, right? So usually they don't have the proper ramping and door clearances and hallway clearances, doorknobs. I mean, there are so many bathroom sizes, right? So you've got the environmental factors, the asbestos, the mechanical systems, the electrical systems, the ADA considerations. So much has to be brought up to code if you're going to substantially renovate the building, that it becomes much more expensive than if actually you were just building out an empty shell of a brand new building. So the answer to the question is it depends on what the end use is, but it is a substantial sum. And quite frankly, you've got, I believe, nearly an acre here.
Right.
And only I think a 6,000 square foot building, right?
Right.
So yeah, because some of it's basement. So 6,500 square feet above grade. So the reality is you've got very little coverage on the site. Usually we can fit 10,000 square feet or more per acre, plus the associated parking at about 4 to 5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. So the reality is, and this is just I didn't look at this property till tonight. So this is a very cursory review of it. But my feeling is that if the building has some special character and value, you may want to keep it and renovate it. Otherwise, if you look at what's on the opposing corners, let me find the map here. This is probably not a great utilization of the site. So I'm just looking at this from a real estate perspective. That's it. Okay, no other considerations. You know, you've got the setback from the street here. Look at your opposing corner. You've got a service station here. They're using the whole site. Here you're not. You've got a lot of green space. So if you were going to try to monetize this site and sell it, most likely whoever's going to buy this is going to knock it down, and they're going to build on the entire site to take advantage of it. And they're going to bring some retail or amenity or something else to the neighborhood that's needed. And most likely the building won't be retained. That's just my 2 cents. So long answer to a.
Yeah, I had a question as well. Could you clarify, is this building of any historical significance? Is there any architectural relevance to it, historical or from a neighborhood perspective? I just need a yes or no answer on that.
Bobby, can you answer that?
And while I have the floor here, in the previous meetings, we talked about having some community engagement. And I know this committee has to do things kind of discreetly and thoroughly before it gets into a public arena. But we are in a position now tonight talking, for example, about an organization that we know very little about that's occupying it. It could be an organization that is doing an extremely good job and the only person in the city of Richmond that's doing that job, and they may need assistance. So how do you get a representative from that organization to talk to the committee, whether it's just a written document that they don't have to interact with us, but how do we know what's really the value of that public amenity, if you will. We are making decisions on people and organizations that is unfair to them. And you know, this is Richmond. We could get into a political thunderstorm over our insensitivity, if you will, to a organization or a community. So how do we talked about community input, but who is in this building, and do we have a right to make a decision based on pure numbers?
All outstanding. I'm going to take a stab at some of that in no particular order, just how they pop in my head, if I may, Lawrence. One, just commend you for your observation. Second, you're right. The community input is indeed, and you recall at our last meeting, we agreed as a group, arrived at a consensus to create essentially 3 different working groups. One of those pertains specifically to the community engagement part. Ms. Stephanie Rizzi, thank you, has agreed to participate in that group. Ms. Cheryl Burke has agreed, yours truly. If there's anybody else that would like to join us, please, please know you're welcome. Second, you'll recall at our last meeting, for example, at the Ruffin Road meeting, we invited some folks that reside in near proximity to the building, and they weighed in and provide their perspective. Well, I'll just say initially my objective was to do the same thing this evening, but my colleague in the third introduced a very valid concern or reservation about that approach or my approach, and specifically that if I may say this, that we would essentially as a committee be kind of cherry picking who had a more unequal say in the building, instead of just providing everyone access. Ergo, why we don't have community members weighing in on this right now. Specific to the current tenant, I would point out what Michelle spoke to a moment ago, that the lease, or I'm sorry, it was Michelle who spoke to that there aren't any performance metrics in the contract, but that certainly doesn't diminish the right and obligation to ask those kind of questions. So point well made. And I, I guess I would just conclude my thought, and apologize for taking so long. I would just conclude my thought with, yeah, it is. It's at the end of the day, it's the big question, right? How do we balance? We may have, for example, a particular group, put aside this specific property, but we may have a particular group in any given property, and what is the value? How do we weigh the value of that group and what services they may be providing vis-a-vis if the city is able to, if we surplus the city and the city is able to sell it for example, $1.5 million, that we can then put back into capital for our schools or for existing infrastructure. I think I don't know that we're going to be able to arrive at any objective numerical analysis. I think that's like a lot of these policy decisions. It's contingent on kind of some very subjective perspective, but I do agree that we absolutely have to account for all of that, and each of us need to weigh in with our own set of lens. So that's just my 2 cents, but I see Stephanie wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I just wanted, is it all right if I call you Lawrence? We haven't met, but okay. I just wanted to come in and jump in with what Lawrence just said. I would like to have some information about how much value the community has, in terms of what this building means to the community around it. I don't know much about the history of the building itself, and that's not something we can monetize or put a dollar value on necessarily, but it's also important. And in terms of like the value that the organization that is the current tenant has to the community. I think those are things certainly you can't put dollar amounts to, but are also important. I have a real estate question for Jason. My question is, if it is ultimately more cost effective to demolish the building, which I think is a really good looking building. I grew up around here too, and I've always enjoyed just looking at it. It looks like an old school. It reminds me of my childhood. I like it there. But if it's more cost effective to demolish it, then why is it valued at $900,000, just the building? Why is it assessed that way?
I believe it is assessed, I'm double checking myself here,
I
at
think, yeah, go ahead.
890,000 for the land and 403,000 for the improvements.
Mhm.
That's
So the
what-
land is worth literally twice what the actual building
And if
is.
they're not being taxed, they're not gonna, challenge the assessment. So if that were a private individual there, they'd say, hey, it's got problems.
Right.
The building is assessed at what now? I'm sorry, I must have gotten it wrong.
So it was the total for the whole property is 1,293,000. Here, let me just share my screen again so it's easier to see if that's okay.
And as Jason's pulling it up, yeah, the short answer is, I mean, the land is worth twice as much as what the actual building is.
Mhm.
Now, I agree with the comment that if you don't, sometimes these assessments just take a life of their own if nobody's really monitoring them and challenging them and paying taxes on them and accountable for it. So who knows whether this is the true market value or not? I don't know.
I mean, Jason, again, another unfair question, but is it realistic to think at this intersection, given that there is already some space utilization that of the highest use, i.e. some surface parking close by? I mean, is it realistic? And we have Paul McClellan on the call too. I mean, is it realistic to think that that the city could sell this property to someone for north of $1 million, or is that?
I think the simple answer is if he could pull up the 7-Eleven directly above it, north of it, if he can pull that parcel up, and just for general principle to see what the land value is versus it's probably the same size.
Yeah, you said that's new, Lawrence. That was just
open.
The
7-Eleven is less than a year and a half old. Yes.
It might not be shown
Can he
here.
pull that parcel up?
Let me do it. Can I do it on the GIS, on the city's GIS? I'll do it while you guys are talking, and then I'll.
Yeah, that's right. That's all I'm asking.
And while we're Paul, I recognize you may or may not be able to share as much as you would prefer, but if you are able, what you are able, are you aware of or able to share anything relevant to this property, and if the city is or has received any unsolicited bids or just not bids, but even just any folks poking around the property? I'm not sure how much you could disclose on that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I don't recall ever having been here. I've been here 10 years and I don't recall having received any offers on it. I know that Mr. Williams, who's the current tenant, contacted us about it. I don't remember if he made an offer beyond the lease that he ended up negotiating with y'all. And we kept pointing him to the school board, since y'all have all the property rights to it, and until you quit claiming the property to us, we don't have all the property rights necessary to sell the property. I do agree with Jason. I mean, I think it has value because it's on the intersection of two commercial streets, obviously, right, on a corner lot. That adds value. The acre adds value.
Yeah.
And then it's a judgment call whether you would really put how much value you put in the historic building. I've got a report that shows it was built in 1925 on a list of all the surplus schools. I don't know who provided that. It's an old report I have, but.
Yeah, that's the same number. That's the same number that I have. Bobby, do you know if there's someone had asked earlier about, I think it was Stephanie maybe. Do we know if if it has any historical significance. I don't know the origin of that building.
I'm not sure. I've got something at the office that I can review, Jonathan, and share with everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Excuse me, Jonathan, if I may.
Cheryl, please.
Yes, thank you so much. When I first came to Richmond in the 70s, that site was a Richmond Public School site with children, students in it. I don't know, at one time it was a specialty school, alternative school or whatever, but when I first came to Richmond, it was a part of Richmond Public Schools, and it was a school that was open. So I'm also thinking in terms of the property behind it on Old Brook Road, the block right behind it, the Pine Camp. I don't know whether you all referenced that. The Pine Camp Cultural Arts you did.
Yeah,
and
Lawrence
community centers. Yeah, so I'm thinking that would also probably, that may be an opportunity, which I think that's owned by the city, correct? Is that right, Lawrence? It's owned by the city. That might be an opportunity. The city to maybe, if we were to surplus it and give it back to the city, that may be an opportunity for people in that neighborhood, in that immediate neighborhood, because it's right on Henrico.
Recreation and parks, of course.
Right, recreation and parks, yes. But right there, that site is right on the Henrico Richmond city line.
Right.
I mean, it's right there, less than a mile, right? So there may be other opportunities there beyond for cultural arts or whatever else. I love the look of the old building as well, as Ms. Rissy stated. I think I always thought it was a school but I understand, would it be worth keeping it up as it is if it's not of historic value, which I'm sure in the city of Richmond, we can find historic values for anything. Okay, so I'm not gonna knock that back. And the grounds are always just so neat, so whatever. It takes me back as well. But
at a glance, it looks like administrative offices for recreation and parks at a glance. That's what it looks like it would be.
That's a thought right there. Is that a site for them?
Extension of the administrative components of Pine Camp, or obviously classrooms, more classroom space. They do have a building on the site now that's vacant and unused, but that's a secondary.
Pine Camp does have a vacant. They have a vacant building.
They have a vacant building, probably 3 times this size on there.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
really?
Two stories, same architectural style. Plus, they have a new, well, you call it state of the art architecturally school board.
So the old one they didn't tear down. They kept the old site there.
Right, and they're not sure what they're going to do with that. So you've got.
So they wouldn't need this then.
They've got surplus property too. Yeah.
So they wouldn't need that. Okay. But I was thinking that would be an opportunity to extend that program, since we're looking for more green spaces and family places and community gathering places. And in that particular neighborhood, as we well know, right there on the line, there are more apartments and businesses. They're not really any homes. There are very few. I shouldn't say not any. Maybe about 3 blocks away. But it's basically apartments, especially all along Chamberlain Avenue.
But yeah, again, things that would serve that population are still.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So I don't know if we're under a time constraint, but a constituent sent me a detailed history of this building.
Oh,
good. I'd like you to recount it, okay?
Can you give us the
right.
version?
The school was acquired by annexation in 1942, having been named the Henrico County section adjacent to a small stream, Brook Run. Its pupils were transferred in September of that year to Ginter Park School, and the building was used for storage. When Ginter Park School became overcrowded, Brook Hill was reopened in 1948 as a junior primary annex. The enrollment at Ginter Park began to diminish in the 1950s, and Brook Hill again became vacant. In September 1959, under an agreement with the Occupational Therapy Curative Workshop, the building was used for the care and treatment of cerebral palsy children. The former Mayo School was then known as Brook Hill. The program for orthopedically handicapped children moved the new Richmond Cerebral Palsy Center in March 1962. At that time, the Cooperative Training Center was transferred from the Navy Diesel School building to Brook Hill, where it remained until 1969. During the early years of Plan 3, the Brook Hill building was again used as an annex to Ginter Park. The park program for pregnant girls was housed here in 1974 to 75. And then the building reverted to designation Brook Hill School in 75 to 77. With education for the severely and profoundly retarded, that's an outdated term now, program under the Title VI Public Law. Approximately 30 students age 15 to 21 were served. So it has a history of like, for special needs students and students who have severe disabilities. I mean, I
So
think
the official name is Brook Hill.
Brook Hill. Mhm.
So was it in Henrico? It was in Henrico County during that time? I heard you say Henrico County in the beginning. That's interesting.
Well,
Since
it says it, having been named for the Henrico County section adjacent to a small
Okay.
stream. So it was annexed to Richmond in 42.
Yeah,
Got it.
been
Got
built by Henrico County. So
Well, it does have historic significance then.
what, Jason, did you find, Lawrence inquired, Stephanie, thank you for that.
Thank you, constituent. Yes.
Yeah, right. Lawrence had inquired about the 7-Eleven and what 7-Eleven paid for that property across the street. Were you able to find that by any chance?
So, am I mute? Okay. I did find the property. Lawrence, you have to tell me if I have the right one, and then we can pull it up and see if it exchanged hands and at what value. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, I think it was what, 1.2 million for land and building, which is kind of low for a 7-Eleven. So you assume it's really worth 1.5 million.
Is this it? Is
yeah.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and I believe it looks like that was under construction at the time when they took the picture. But according to the city records there that you pulled up, it's
Well, it's actually traded at nearly $4 million.
Yeah, actually it's 4 million.
What is it? What did it?
So
was it?
I think it appears to me, Lawrence, correct me if I'm wrong, in April 2019, it sold for $1,025,000 by this entity, the Robbins family. Then it sold again in, not even a year later for nearly 4 million, but that must have been a finished building for the price to go up that much.
Go back up to detail. Go up to detail on the left, far left.
Yep.
How big is that property, the 7-Eleven property?
There it is.
Right. Yeah.
Is that an acre? Because the property we're talking about on the other side is our property is an acre. What is this property?
This is 0.81 acres. So not quite as big. And the size of the store is only, 2,900 square feet. So
go to the third tab for assessments and let's see what happens.
Okay. 1.1.
Yeah. Reassessment 1.1, improvements. So the city's records are recognizing that it is a retail commercial parcel. I'm assuming it would be zoned that under normal conditions.
And actually, they need to update their assessment. If it's sold for 4 million and they've only got assessed at 1.1, they're missing some tax revenue there.
Yeah.
What was Lawrence? What was there? Was that just a vacant lot, or was something demolished for construction?
Basically just a donut shop. It was vacant land.
And before that, it was a burger shop. Remember when the Big Boys or something burger shop was there? Then it was donuts. Then it was something else.
Is this Is this picture what was there before the 7-Eleven?
Yes.
Yes, it was.
So I think the main issue is to verify what the new, you can check that with the assessor's office, what's the new assessment value, but given the 7-Eleven, a quick answer is it's got to be 1.5, $1.7 million worth of land if somebody else would build some competing use. So it's worth 1.7 million.
I agree that if it's sold for $1 million and it's 80% the size of your parcel, then arguably there's no difference in the viability of the corner, right?
Right.
Whether you're across the street or the other side. So it should be north of 1 million as a viable sales price. And you guys could always get an appraisal, but I agree with Lawrence.
And the other side of it is because the building is masonry, and we have to all acknowledge once the state gets involved from a historical assessment, it's going to be labeled historically relevant. whether we take that under advisement, but at a glance, you would say it's 70% viable as a historic structure to be respected. But we'll see how that works. Versus seldom you demolish a building of that type in Richmond.
So another thought, in the master plan that's listed as a node, Azalea and Chamberlain Avenue. And so in the future, they haven't rezoned it yet, but they're looking at 2 to 5 story buildings that are more urban in character in the area. So in relation to what Stephanie was saying, could we borrow against the value? Well, we can't do that, but if we can keep it hobbling along for 5 years, that could actually be worth a lot more. Also, that's a gateway to the city, and architecturally, that is a little interesting. If we have 4 buildings that are like, modern 7-Elevens, that's not spectacular. And it's weird, those all 4 are in Richmond. I thought the border was on the other side of Azalea, but I think it's not.
Yeah, what excellent points, Richard. Paul, and folks, we're up against our timelines. We're gonna have to adjourn here shortly because I want to respect everyone's other obligations. But Paul, I asked you a question about this property, 4929 specifically, but again, I'm always putting you in this awkward position to be candid when sometimes for professional reasons you have to perhaps not disclose everything you may know. But is there anything, to Richard's point, that we could see coming down the pike there for some of that other surface parking, or some of those other lots that would, to Richard's point, maybe we should hang on to the building for a little bit longer, or anything you can share with us?
I definitely think that with the master plan recommendations, over time, you're going to see some redevelopment of those parcels in that area, and possibly with the higher density, and with probably, who knows, there's such a boom right now in multifamily development. There may be more multifamily headed that way too. So, and certainly the site, the real school site could have value for multifamily too, and maybe somebody might be interested in retaining the historic building and maybe adding on to the back or something. But I think it has value, particularly because it butts up to the park, to Pine Camp, and that would be a real amenity for residential if somebody wanted to do it. So.
Paul, is across the street over there where the old Azalea Mall is, in Westminster, Canterbury, buy up some of that land?
I think I may have heard that, but I'm not an expert on that property.
Can I, again, I'm the new guy, so tell me to shut up if I'm talking too much.
Please.
But, in my mind, if you guys are going to make an educated decision, you probably ought to get an appraisal on the property and see what it's worth if you keep the historic structure and were to use it for some other use, including the existing one, or you raise it and you sell it to somebody who wants to do something else with it there. And so you've got 2 values: keep it as is, or raise the building and redevelop it. And then at least you can figure out, we don't know whether the tax assessed value is accurate or not. An appraisal is likely to do a better job of confirming what that actual value is. And then you guys can determine, if you call it $1 million, whatever the sales proceeds would be, then you can take that money and put it to some other good in the school system, or you can decide to leave that $1 million in place because you've decided that particular building, the use in it, the lease is worth keeping. It provides some social good that has a value that, on top of whatever the monetary number is, it's worth keeping. If the tenant, and I don't know anything about the tenant, they're paying $600 a month, that's $7,200 a year. That's a very poor investment on $1 million plus property. Okay. There's anybody that should disagree with me on that. Now I'm being very insensitive here.
No, thank you.
Only talking about numbers.
Yeah,
Okay?
I think, Jason, I think you're correct. You kind of laid it out. And I think going back to what Lawrence said is, you need to kind of look into what value keeping it and the current tenant, what value to the community it has. And the other question on that is if this tenant, is there a, I don't know, oversight with this tenant? There's some type of, board or whatever that kind of evaluates this tenant or what they're doing in the community that we could find out about?
Maybe can I have one closing thought. For $7,200 a year, you guys could pay their rent somewhere else and move them and take that $1 million+ and put it to good in the school system, and everybody would win. So my point is it's not a great return on investment to keep the tenant. It doesn't have anything to do with the good of the organization. It's just the utilization of the building. So I'll sign off now.
I think we also heard the history of the building, and obviously demographics is affecting the value of that property. But when we heard the history, we recognized that it was used, wasn't used, it was used again, and it was used back and forth as a yo-yo. But what we're saying is the school system and the demographics and the changing neighborhoods, it may be needed again. It's hard to tell, but we have to consider that too. Sometimes things have a life of their own, and so there's a pattern to it. Strategic pieces of land go up and down in value. So do we keep it or do we not keep it because we may need it later? History has shown that it was needed later because of demographic changes. Okay.
Thank you all. I'm sorry. Did I miss something?
Point well taken. Thank you, Jonathan, so much for facilitating this meeting tonight, as you always do. I just want us to get to the point where, as 2021, we make a decision on properties someplace and move forward. And the reason I'm stating that is Jason just stated as well. Would you all let me live there for $72,000 a year in a $1 million building, 6,000 square feet? Think about it. So whatever the decision is, whether we decide to keep it or move on, I just hope we get some, we need the financial support. Do we give it back to the city? I hope that we make a decision regarding some pieces of property, this one probably being first, as to what we're going to do. So when we meet next month, if we can just come to bring the appraisal, someone will bring the appraisal, find out is it to our advantage, as Jason stated, to raise it and sell it, because we're not getting a great return on this at all. I mean, we could just think what we could do with $1 million. It's not a lot of money, but that would help us with a few bathrooms within our schools. So, and it's a beautiful building from the outside. I would love to see the inside. It's a beautiful built old building, but being mindful too, as it was stated, is if it's better to build a 2-story apartment or condos or something else there, I understand. That neighborhood has changed, but it may change again. More school spaces may be needed.
There is a February 17th, 2017 Richmond Free Press article about the gentleman who's doing some vocational education in there. So you should probably.
Yeah, the gentleman who's in there, right.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Richard.
Will somebody order an appraisal now? Are we sure we'll have one for next meeting? Mr. Hathaway, do you do that?
Can't hear you, Bobby.
I will check into it.
Thank you, Bobby. And thank you all. To Cheryl's point, and I'll just remind everyone that we agreed at the last meeting and what we're going to prayerfully do next. If you've had an opportunity to look at that link that Kim sent to you all, but at the last meeting and in the minutes, we agreed that by April the 1st, we are going to we're going to make a decision on this property and the other properties. And specifically, I need to remind everybody we're in this awkward place where this committee, when it was established by the school board, it's going to report findings or observations, perhaps is another synonym to the board, in lieu of recommendations. Granted, maybe it's semantics, but I do want to point that out. So by April the 1st, it's our obligation to provide findings or observations to the school board. including on this property. Any other, oh, I'm sorry, we need to approve the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity, or at least a quorum of folks had an opportunity to review the minutes from the 2 preceding meetings? Again, Kimberly sent that out via email just in the last hour. She posted some time ago. Thank you, Kim, but she also made it even easier for us to link up tonight. If you have, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the preceding 2 meetings?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the minutes as written.
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank
you.
you. Is there any discussion? If not, Madam Clerk, if you'd please call the roll.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mrs. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Rizzi?
Yes.
Steve Panchin?
Yes.
Lawrence Williams?
No, I abstain.
Okay. And Mr. Richard Romero?
Abstain.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you all. Please anticipate receipt of new correspondence soon pertinent to next meeting, along with some additional information pertinent to tonight, but also other properties and going forward. Thank you all. I was grateful.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.